the microphones. They are auto on. So as you start talking, you will need to speak up, but they'll go green. So you don't need to push any buttons.
Salute, so please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Join me for a moment of silence honoring the officers who have passed away since the last meeting. Deputy Ryan Klinkenbrummer from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and Officer Chad Swanson, Manhattan Beach Police Department. Thank you. Please take your seats. All right, Mr. Knapp, will you please take roll call?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Okay. Committee Member Allen. Committee Member Banning. Committee Member Coronado. Committee Member Cottrell.
present.
Committee Member DiBasilio.
Here.
Committee Member Oborn. Committee Member Salazar.
Here.
Committee Member Spry. Committee Member Therio.
Here.
Committee Member Viramontes. And Committee Member Waltz.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I would now like to introduce Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow and Post Executive Director Manny Alvarez.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now move to public comment. This is time set aside for members of the public to comment on items on the commission agenda. Pursuant to commission policy, the commission chair will manage the public comment period in deference to the commission's workload and meeting time constraints. Up to 15 minutes is allotted at the beginning of each commission meeting for public comments on items on the agenda. Based on recent events, more people than usual may want to address the commission. Therefore, if required, we will go longer than 15 minutes, but may limit this period to no more than 1 hour as we have many topics to cover on the agenda. Members of the public who wish to speak are asked to limit their remarks to no more than 5 minutes each. If we have many people who wish to speak on the same topic, I, as the chair, may intervene and will ask that you limit remarks to no more than 1 minute. Pursuant to existing commission policy, the chair may conclude the public comment period if multiple speakers are voicing repetitive or similar statements and the 15-minute public comment period has expired. Please be advised that the commission cannot take action on items not on the agenda. And please remember that this meeting is being transcribed, so I may politely interrupt and ask you to repeat or speak slowly and clearly so your comment can be correctly captured in the transcript. Is there anyone who would like to address the advisory committee during public comment? When it is your turn, if you wish, please state your name and organization. Seeing no comments, we will move to the action items and approval of action summary and minutes. Our first item is the approval of the action summary and meeting minutes from the June 7, 2023 advisory committee meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the June 7, 2023 meeting? So moved. Motion from DiBasilio. I have a second.
I'll second.
Second from Cottrell. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. And we'll now move on to announcements. I will now call upon Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow to provide the announcements.
Thank you, sir. Would like to recognize 2 new advisory members. First one is Chella Cottrell. Chella is with the Citrus Heights Police Department, and she is filling a position for public safety dispatcher. So we want to welcome Chella and give you an opportunity to say anything.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. Quite frankly, I'm humbled to be here, and I hope to do the profession proud by listening and learning and also giving some input where it's needed. Post has made some really great strides in the last couple of years to continue the profession of dispatching and bring it into the future where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second new member is Benjamin Terrell. And Ben is from the PORAC. He's from Richmond Police Department and representing PORAC. Welcome, Ben. If anything you'd like to add.
Oh, thank you. Same applies to me. I'm humbled, happy to be here and to be a part of training and officers in the state of California. I'm part of that. Continue to be the best. Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right, thank you and welcome to both of you to the committee. So we'll now move on to presentations, and Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow will announce the agenda items to be presented.
Thank you again, Chairman. At this time, we receive requests from advisory committee members to have presentations on the following agenda items: consent items B1, B5, B6, B11, B14, B15, B16, as well as Basic Training Bureau items D1 and D2, Certification Bureau items E1, E2, and E3, and post-ad item F1.
Okay, at this time, I will call upon Bureau Chief Thomas Chalk, Training Delivery and Compliance Bureau, to provide a report on course certification statistics for July 1 to October 31, 2023.
Chair Salazar, members of the committee, good afternoon. I'm Tom Chalk, Bureau Chief of the Training, Delivery, and Compliance Bureau, and I'm here to report on course certification statistics, item B1. And this is a status report of courses which have been certified and decertified from July 1, 2023 to October 2023. And during this time period, Post certified 11 new presenters, decertified 0 presenters, 204 new courses were certified, 100 certified, and for 1,918 course modifications, and we had 5,575 total active courses in our course catalog and 1,029 presenters. And this report is submitted to the commission as information only, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee on this item? None? Okay, thank you for your report.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, at this time, I will call upon Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler, Certification Bureau, to provide a report on peace officer certification statistics.
Good afternoon. So our report on peace officer certification statistics, are we able to show those new numbers that we came up with yesterday? The statistics that were originally included in the agenda item are actually slightly off when it comes to our 1029 Government Code 1029 disqualifications and revocations, and I'll explain that when I get there. I just wanted to ask to have those new numbers up there for you. So for our current,
Michelle, if we can interrupt, just so we can put it on the screen, which one would you like up on the screen?
can we do the revocations, because that's the bigger one.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry. So our reporting period for these statistics is September 1st through October 31st of 2023. During this time, these 2 months, we had approved 1,241 new notices of appointment. So for our new members, those are the individuals that are newly appointed to an agency as a peace officer. They could be brand new peace officers, or they could be lateral peace officers from one agency to another, but it's still considered a new appointment. We issued 939 proofs of eligibility. So those are individuals who do not yet have a basic certificate, or their peace officer classification is not eligible for a basic certificate. So those would be your new academy graduates, so your probationary officers, possibly your jail deputies, your reserve officers who've never been a full-time peace officer. We issued 607 basic certificates in those 2 months, and we received 1,167 affidavits of separation. So again, those could be people who are retiring, resigning in good standing, but they could also be people who are resigning from their agency and then going to another agency. All agencies have to advise us that somebody is separating. We currently have 103,236 active peace officer certifications. That does include retirees within the 3-year window of separation. And we have 154,133 inactive peace officer certifications. So that includes your retirees who are beyond their 3 years, but also individuals who were issued proofs of eligibility, separated from their agency without ever receiving a basic certificate, so they would be inactive. During this period, we issued 7 immediate temporary suspensions. So those are the suspensions of peace officers at the discretion of our executive director under certain conditions. And we're gonna do that again. Yeah. Okay. And then we received 2 voluntary surrenders from officers. I believe they were in Southern California. Actually, no, these were from Central California. I'm sorry. And then here are the numbers that were a little bit off. We had a little bit of a miscommunication when we were preparing this report. Some of the information we received got a little mixed up. The number that's there shows that there were 25 individuals during this reporting period who were disqualified based on government 1029 felony conviction. Those were prior to January 1st of 2022. That number is actually 34 when we retally the numbers for year to date. And then we have listed on here 6 individuals who have had their certifications revoked based on Government Code 1029 felony conviction after January 1st, 2022. And that number is actually 10 after recalculating. And then if you go down and look at the affidavits of separation that we received related to serious misconduct, the majority of them were for dishonesty at 23. We received 7 related to abuse of power, 3 related to physical abuse, 5 related to sexual assault, 3 related to demonstrating bias, 16 related to egregious and repeated acts that violate the law, 2 for involvement in a law enforcement gang, 6 for failure to cooperate with an investigation, and 1 for failure to intercede. So for those of you who haven't heard this yet, these numbers can be slightly I don't want to say misconstrued, misrepresenting, because an individual could have multiple allegations of misconduct and be terminated or resign for during an investigation or for the allegation. So somebody may be double counted or triple counted in these numbers. And then just so that you guys can see the correct listing of officers who were deemed ineligible to be a peace officer based on a 1029 conviction.
That was the one that was up a second ago, right?
Oh, that was up. Okay, I missed that. Sorry. I guess that was already up there and didn't see it. So just so, in the interest of transparency, because we had one list, we didn't want to correct the other list and then have people wonder what happened to the other names. So we did a year to date. This one is the individuals who will have their certifications revoked once the commission has heard this presentation tomorrow and has an opportunity to vote on that based on a conviction after January 1st, 2022. Hopefully you don't know any of them. Are there any questions about this presentation?
Questions from the committee members? Comments? I actually do have one question. So with regards to affidavits of separation related to serious misconduct where they could be double or triple counted, do we have an actual count of how many officers are represented in that number?
I do not have that currently available, but I can have something for our next meeting separated out so that you can have that more specific number. Also, for future meetings, to avoid this kind of confusion, we are planning to provide year-to-date numbers as we go from meeting to meeting rather than a reporting period. So in this case, also, we combined multiple agenda items so that all the numbers are accurate.
I have a question, Chair. The 7 intermediate. Sorry, immediate temporary suspensions, those are just from the past month?
From the past 2 months. Well, it does not include November, so it's September and October, 2023.
Thanks.
Any additional questions or comments? All right, thank you for the report. Okay, we'll now move on to item number B6, and at this time, I will call upon Assistant Executive Director Anne Marie Delmanau, Executive Office, to provide a report on peace officer revocations based on felony convictions.
Good afternoon, members of the committee and chairperson. Michelle just provided the revocation list based on 1029 convictions. I think if you would, I can kind of go over something that is later on the agenda if you'd like, and cover the immediate temporary suspension list under item 13. If you care for me to do that now, or I can wait, up to you.
I'm fine with that. I assume there were a number of these items on the agenda that are probably redundant to some degree, and some are action items for the commission, some are reports. So yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. I think it speaks to the question you had, sir, about immediate temporary suspensions. There's 96 currently issued immediate temporary suspensions. We've done 6 withdrawals. Those withdrawals have either been based on the fact that after further review of the situation, the case does not warrant or meet the threshold for an immediate temporary suspension. If we can bring up item 13, thank you. So this is going to be difficult for you to read, but this is a running total of all of the immediate temporary suspensions. This is alphabetically for every officer that has been issued an immediate temporary suspension since January 1st, 2023. The reason why this is going before the commission is really just kind of a case status update. The law requires that for immediate temporary suspensions that we promptly review these cases and that they move through the administrative process in an expedited fashion, because obviously some of these officers are not working, some are working, and yet right now their certification is on hold. I think what's notable about this is that 56% of every immediate temporary suspension that the executive director has issued has been as a result of a felony arrest or an indictment. And so what that means, obviously, most of you are aware that the case is somewhat told until there's an outcome for the criminal proceeding. So that means there may be a delay in proceeding with those cases based on the fact that it's, proceeding through the criminal courts. For those cases that are under investigation with post, there are cases where the agency is still completing the internal affairs investigation. So there was some immediate action on the part of the agency to either terminate the officer or the officer resign during a pending investigation. Many of you know that as a result of Senate Bill 2, even if that is the case, the agency is still responsible to complete the internal affairs investigation. Some of these cases, those IAs have not been completed. So they're pending an outcome of the IA from the agency. I think what you should start to see as we move through many of these cases is the cases coming before the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board, and then forward to the commission should be these ITS cases where the board and the commission will have an opportunity to render a decision about whether to move forward with decertification or suspension. Any questions regarding this?
I have a question.
Yes.
Are these cases, before they go through the post to the separate board on discipline, is post waiting till the like the arbitration process or the full administrative process is completed, or does that happen simultaneously?
Both. There are times where, based on the nature of the case and the facts of the case, it's and the timing, it makes sense for us to do that. We are not obligated to wait for the administrative review. If there's an appeal at the agency level, we have to look at whether or not it is the most responsible thing for Post to do to proceed with the case. Obviously, we're always looking at the public welfare, right? If there's a health, welfare, and safety threat. For the most part, if they're under an ITS, that kind of mitigates some of the concern. But I think it's a mixed answer, if you will, in that there may be times where the officer is so close to arbitration at that point, it makes sense for Post to wait for that outcome. But I can tell you that we have proceeded with cases currently that we're working through right now that'll go to the board and the commission where there are still pending arbitrations. Yes. Thank you for your question.
Additional questions on either one of these items, B6 or B13? And for clarification, B6 is regards to Government Code 1029. So those are felony convictions where they're ineligible just based on the conviction. So
Yeah.
that wouldn't go before the Police Accountability Board.
Correct.
And for item 13, I believe we do have another item that comes up that has to do with due process with regards to ITS.
And with regard to the revocation list that you guys saw earlier on 1029s, as Chairman Salazar mentioned, there's a difference between the ineligibilities, which are cases that were prior to January 1st, 2022. It's a notation on their profile that they're ineligible to be a peace officer in California. Anything post January 1st, we actually take a more formative step, and that's the revocation. So the certification itself is revoked, and that's reported to the National Decertification Index. The commission has to vote on revocations, so that's why they're parsed out in that fashion. So I know it's a little confusing because we show this 1029 kind of global list, but for the purposes of those officers that have suffered a conviction after January 1st, 2022, that's an actual revocation of the certification. That's the distinction.
Okay. And Anne Marie, can you articulate the ineligibility? That was prior to SB2. We were always mandated to do that, and that's the distinction. That's
Right.
why it's revocation or ineligible, right?
Yep.
Is that correct?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, no additional questions or comments. Thank you for the report. I will now move to item B11, and at this time call upon Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotkow from the Executive Office to provide a report on compliance with post regulations regarding Perishable Skills Program, PSP, and continuing professional training.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. At the September 2023 Commission meeting, Post staff facilitated a discussion regarding statewide percentage reports on regulatory compliance with perishable skills known as PSPs and continuing professional training known as CPT. At that time, the commission directed staff to identify a means for transparent reporting of compliance with training mandates. So under Commission Regulation 1005, it requires that every peace officer other than a level 3 reserve and every public safety dispatcher and public safety dispatch supervisor shall satisfactorily complete the CPT requirement of 24 or more hours of post-qualifying training during every 2-year CPT cycle based upon the statewide CPT anniversary dates. Continuing professional training is training that exceeds the training required to meet and requalify entry-level minimum standards. It is required for certain peace officers and dispatch personnel employed by post-participating agencies to maintain, update, and expand or enhance an individual's knowledge and skills. This includes the training required for Perishable Skills Program. The Perishable Skills Program refers to the psychomotor and communications refresher training required to be completed by all peace officers below the level of middle management, which is normally known as like a lieutenant. The specific topics and hourly requirements of the PSP are described in Commission Regulation 1005. So Post does not currently have the authority within the law to take action regarding an agency or its officers who fail to meet the 24-hour CPT or PSP training requirements within the 2-year cycle. Post staff propose the following options within the scope of our authority to address the concerns of peace officers who failed to complete the mandated CPT and or PSP training. So if we can put slide number 1 of mine up, please. So the first slide should depict the publishing of an ongoing report of compliance on the post website by agency that identifies the total number and percentage. The total number and percentage of officers currently in compliance with CPT and PSP mandates. So we currently have the data warehouse, which we house forward-facing information to the public. So when the slide comes up, you'll see where we would list it by agency name, and then it would be listed by CPT compliance, how many are required in an agency to do CPT, and PSP, how many are required, how many have completed it by numbers, and then percentages of both. We are getting continuous CPRAs or Records Act requests for this information currently, and we feel that posting it up there would make it public, where currently they have access to information, and we would be able to just allow them, direct them to that to be able to get that information. One moment while we. Okay. Yeah, no problem. We'll give it just a minute. So while they're looking for the slide, one of the things, this is within authority of post currently to actually do this. We are not seeking permission from the commission per se, but direction about what they might like to see on this. So this is something that we have the ability to do and would be fairly easy. Part of what you'll see with this is going to be that we would put a disclaimer within it to reflect the fact that it may not indicate any mitigating factors, such as people on military leave or on some kind of administrative or maybe maternity leave or something that maybe prohibits them from being able to complete the training. But it would just give raw numbers for who has completed it. When we go into the second portion, we'll kind of talk about how we may be able to mitigate some of that. This may be a little bit hard to read, but this is a mock-up of what it would look like. I believe we have this as River City PD and River City Sheriff's Department. And so as I mentioned, it would reflect what the CPT cycle is. In this case, it's 21, 22. And then it would also, as I mentioned before, list the total number of personnel who are required to attend CPT, the total number who have completed it so far, and then PSP also, because the numbers are different for PSP and CPT, as we talked about, and then the percentage of staff that have completed it. So you would see early on in the cycle that the numbers would be low, and we would put reference to that in that higher document area where we talk about the fact that it's going to be listed from the first day of the cycle, but then it'll be updated on a regular basis by our computer services staff to reflect as the 2-year cycle goes on that in fact it's what the compliance rates are. Any questions on that particular one?
I do have some questions on that. First of all, thank you for putting together the report and to post or finding a method to impart the compliance information to both individual agencies and the engaged entities. Just for clarification, on the first graphic, which we had pulled up, it talked about the total number of peace officers, and then the next column was CPT required. And my question is that on this graphic, those numbers seem to match, but in the report, it talks about how there are other employees and other entities that are required to have CPT credits. So I wanted to ask who was going to be represented under that CPT compliance number.
That number currently, as we've had it, is on peace officers, because that was the focus of what we were asked to do. I think if I'm reading what you're asking, are we also including dispatchers or other pretty much dispatch supervisors in those numbers? Those don't currently reflect that, but we certainly could do that if that was something that the commission wanted us to do.
I think it's worthy of discussion, because if we're trying to have transparency to the state about where we are with our compliance numbers, we want to make sure that the numbers for CPT compliance do reflect what the agency's responsibility is, especially when we're talking about funding, to ensure that the agencies are coming forward for the funding to supply training to their personnel. And then if the CPT numbers and the PSP numbers don't match, I think it's easily explainable that the PSP numbers are going to be different, as those only apply to peace officers. And then as a follow-up question, Do we know what date Post anticipates publishing this report to the website in relation to the end of the CPT cycle?
We would probably get it going, depending on what the commission wanted. Again, we don't need a change of regulation, so there's not really a time constraint upon us. It'd be something we could get early next year. We'd be shooting for January, I believe, of this next year to start having it be published on there, so.
Just as a thought of consideration, if there was a method, if we could use that CPC, what do we call it? We're calling it the CPRA tab that we do notifications to the agencies when a report is required. We might want to give those numbers to the agencies via that tab or a different tab, letting them know what numbers were going to be published so that the organization knew ahead of time and made any adjustments necessary before the numbers were published. And also that would loop in the exec staff of the individual agencies and not just the training managers to ensure that the numbers were accurate for reporting.
You clarify, you're saying that you'd be suggesting that we do a report out to the agencies about what their officers who have attended training or not, that we're going to be publishing it? Because that's going to be published. You're saying the one time before we do it the first time, or?
Just to give them the notification, because I do think it's the onus of the responsibilities on the agency to ensure we're in compliance with our training. But since we're going to be reporting on a public website what that compliance looks like, it may be a point of consideration to give the agencies a first look at that. So we knew what was going to be published prior to it being published on the website for public dissemination.
So we would do a bulletin before we release this, so that would go out to the field, just like most other updates we do. As far as publishing it ahead of time to the agencies, it's something we can consider definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
So the data is live data. So the CPT cycle ends this next December, right? We're in the middle of the first CPT cycle. So when the CPT cycle comes out, the very first one is January of 2025. There's probably going to be like 100% non-compliance because it literally will be live data. There won't be an update to it. It'll change daily as officers and dispatchers get their training. So there will have to be some kind of note on there at the very bottom saying, hey, this covers this CPT cycle and it's not complete until December 31 of such and such a year. So it's live data. So yeah, we would definitely put out a bulletin to give everybody a heads up. I don't believe you can drill down to the individual department to see which peace officers and dispatchers are not compliant. It'll just give an overall number, but it will be live data, I guess, is the main point.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So any other questions on that? Because there's a second step to this also that we are proposing we could do in response to the request.
No, those figures populated as the rosters are processed.
Yeah, it'd be auto-populated as the rosters are populated into EDI. And so it would be, as Manny mentioned, the executive director mentioned, it would be live numbers for the most part. It will be uploaded daily.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I do have comment and question. First, with regards to Ms. Cottrell's comment I do believe it should include dispatchers as well. I think that's important. The agencies are also tracking the CPT for dispatch. So I think that is an excellent point. Two, with regards to agencies being notified before and had a comment with Mr. Grotkow. If a post bulletin, if it were to go out, notifying agency were to happen, agencies can also look it up on their own on the post EDI. And like when we try to track that every month to see where we're at. And so we could probably include in the post bulletin to remind agencies they can monitor their own numbers through EDI to make sure that they're staying in compliance and know where they're at. And then my question had to do with because it's live numbers. And so the data would maybe reflect the statistics at the beginning of a cycle, which like you said, would be 100% non-compliance potentially. Would Post also have any historic data? So at the conclusion of a cycle, so if you at the beginning, you may be starting a new cycle, but at the end of this last cycle, this is where these agencies lined up to have some sort of kind of final report, I suppose.
So yeah, if you look, and I know it's not up on the screen anymore, but the idea would be, and this is mock up what you saw on the screen. So we're open to suggestions without a doubt on that. So it would be where you should be able to look it up by cycle. So the current cycle that we're going through should remain up there just so they can see a pattern of our agencies improving as a result of this being posted, or are they staying consistent with what their numbers have been? So you'd be able to pull it up by cycle would be the way we anticipate doing it. Because we haven't actually built the actual system, that's still to be determined based upon recommendations.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So it sounds like the consensus from, or from your comments, Chief, would be that have those past cycles available also, at least as we move forward. So,
I think it gives a better picture to those that are looking at how an agency is complying. Because like you said, if they're coming in the middle of a cycle, there's a lot to explain to someone who's just maybe not have familiarity with the process. So, but if you have a concluding report that shows at the end of this cycle, there's how these agencies were, that kind of gives a better picture of how agencies are complying.
absolutely. And at our last, at the last commission meeting, we actually ran reports for the last 3 cycles. And we didn't include it in this one because we addressed it in the last one. So we certainly have that data, and it would be very easy to populate that within there. Again, it excludes the dispatchers because that wasn't a focus, but I think it's a valid concern to make sure we include everybody subject to CPT cycles. So thank you.
Jim, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I know they didn't have the benefit of the September meeting, just overall numbers, can we just articulate kind of how we broke it down for the commission by size of agency and what the averages were, just generally speaking? Just so you guys have an idea what the compliance rates are?
Absolutely. So we broke it down. We had to figure out a way to break it down by agency because we do have everything from very small agencies to very large agencies in the state. So we broke it down into 5 different categories: agencies 1 through 30 in size, 31 through 100, 101 through 250, 251 through 1,000, and 1,000 plus. And what we saw in it was, for the CPT, we were on the agencies that were 1 to 30, we had about a 94% rate of attendance or completion. Down as far as to the agencies 1,000 or above, we had about an 86%. And that was in the cycle 2017-18, which was our last cycle before COVID, which is probably one of the more accurate cycles, because during COVID, there were struggles. And we saw that in the numbers to a degree of agencies being able to get people to training, because oftentimes training wasn't being put on, or focuses were on trying to just deal with day-to-day operations. So those numbers, when it came to PSPs, were lower. So when it came to in that same cycle, 2017 to 18, it was 82% compliance for PSP and 73 compliance. I'm sorry, for agencies 1 through 30 in size, and 73% for agencies over 1,000 or over. And so that is obviously a concern to us. There was some conversation at the last commission meeting about posts, suggesting maybe posts should come up with a percentage that's acceptable. And we truly believe that you can't set a percentage less than 100% that's acceptable, because you can't have that one officer is in that small agency that within that percentage that gets into some kind of an incident, and they say, well, they're within your compliance rate. And so the only compliance rate that we see is that would be ultimately acceptable would be 100% compliance. So if that helps, does that cover what you want?
Yeah,
Sure.
thank
Okay.
you.
So that's the data we used before. And because we have all that data, it would be pretty easy to populate that for the historical right away. So the second item, if we could put the slide up, is an amendment to commission regulation and/or procedures that would require each post-participating law enforcement agency to identify via the post electronic data interchange, EDI, those officers who are not in compliance with CPT and/or perishable skills training requirements, and list any mitigating factors. So again, this is a mock-up done by our computer services personnel of what it could look like, and where the training manager or designee would be able to go in there and identify the individual that didn't get the training done. And in this case, the example is military. They were deployed for 2 years for military training. And so they would be, they'd be listed as mitigating, and then we could have a column that's listed as mitigation. So we could, in essence, be reducing down those percentages significantly, potentially, for someone that's on maternity leave or maybe extended leave for whatever the reason is. The issue that we see, there's a couple of them. One is we don't have access to your agency personnel files. So we don't know why somebody didn't complete training. So we will oftentimes get asked the question, well, do you think 90% is a good rate? And we don't know if the 10% all happen to be on some kind of a leave, or if they just didn't go to the training, because we're not privy to that information, but you are as the agencies. And so that's something that would definitely have to be put back. There was some concerns by voiced during the commission meeting about the amount of work that would put on. the agencies to do. And if you look at an agency that has, for instance, a 94%, an agency with 31 to 100 people with a 94% compliance rate, you're talking about just over 5% of the officers that would need to be mitigated. That's only 5 officers. We don't believe that that's a huge lift. And then if you go into the bigger agencies over 1,000 people, you're looking at a 14% in one case. You're talking 140 officers for some of the large agencies over 1,000. So we believe that it has a value. So at least it can be mitigated. And so when it's looked at, there's factors in there that will kind of lessen that. You're not just sending officers to training. There's reasons behind them not getting to the training that post isn't privy to. There are some factors that we identified throughout this process that are concerning, which is because this information could be released to the public. You may be identifying some reasons why somebody's not available at training, maybe out of the country because of deployment, that if a PRA occurred, somebody may have access to the information by name of an individual that didn't go to training and why they didn't go to training. That may be of concern for personnel related issues. So those are some factors that the commission will need to consider as possible negative factors involved with listing an officer in EDI is not compliant by name. So
May I add some commentary
Absolutely.
to what you said too, Jim? So the first slide we think is important to get out there because the public wants to know. They're asking, the media's reporting on agency compliance. So we think it's important to get out there. But if you don't include the mitigation, it's very problematic because they don't understand it. And they go, okay, you've got a department with 10 officers and 4 of them didn't complete it. Well, one's on injury, one's been in the military, one's been, on whatever, and they're only, 40% or 60% compliant. So the numbers don't tell the whole story, or they're working in the jail and they have different training requirements. So it throws it off significantly. So without putting those mitigation factors in there or some mitigation statement to say, hey, 4 of these people are mitigated, it doesn't give a true picture. But then on the back end, as Jim pointed out, that slide, it doesn't give tell us why they're sick or tell us why they're out. It just has a couple of drop downs, but then it could become public, right? Somebody's been gone for 2 years in military leave. Do we want the public to know that, hey, their house is vacant for the last 2 years? So it comes with some problems. There's no question. So we're just trying to noodle through it, but we do think the first slide in some fashion should be out there. As problematic as it can be for some departments, I'm sure, they're going to get some scrutiny, but we're getting the Public Records Act requests regularly. Other states are posting their information. We think it's, whether we like it or not, it's the trend. So we think we should do something.
Mr. Waltz?
Yeah, just a comment on the first part with the compliance percentage. I think that the current training cycle is not as meaningful to the public view as it is to the agency. To the agency, I mean, this is data that can be gleaned from EDI anyway. But to the public, in my experience, a lot of agencies have a very low compliance percentage for the first 18 months of their cycle. And then all of a sudden it's scramble to get everything put together, and that compliance rate comes up really quickly. And but the public doesn't really understand that. The agencies can look at that as a general view of their agency progress, but maybe more of an explanation in the text of that web page as to this has to be completed by a certain date. I don't know. It's something that can be really skewed in the public eye.
Can I ask another question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So Member Waltz, are you recommending, and I kind of think you are, I just want to clarify, which is maybe not a bad idea, to just post historical information after the cycle is complete as opposed to the ongoing cycle? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think that the historical data is a lot more meaningful to the public, and it's a more accurate snapshot of what the agencies are doing. Looking at a agency having 36% percent compliance after 8 months into the 24-month cycle really doesn't have a lot of meaning, but it's something that people can get pretty upset about.
Any questions?
Add to
Mr.
that,
Coronado?
I agree with that as well. I mean, you have an agency that's large, over 6,000 employees. We're not just talking 30, so that's a bigger lift to maintain and monitor. And if we did post what the after fact, then I think you would eliminate a lot of issues that may arise throughout the year or while the whole process of that 2-year cycle is going on. Then that gives the agency a chance to not catch up, but do a deficiency report, and then those that didn't attend, why didn't they attend, and then make sure that they're getting to that training without having the uproar of why aren't they doing it at month 8. So just food for thought. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I would agree with that because a smaller agency, it takes us sometimes longer to find the funding and the ability to send people to trainings. So if you're giving live data, I think that's gonna view what is actually happening within the department. So I think that if you're given, like what Randy is saying, that you give the information for the past 2 years or however the cycle wants to go, I think it's going to be a lot more accurate for the public to see what the agency's doing as opposed to what they're doing today. Because what they're doing today is not going to be accurate.
I agree with all that, and I don't really understand why we're going to be an identifier to individual. I'm sorry, that was a little bit confusing. Mitigation, something identifiable for officers that have mitigated issues.
So it could be. So if there's a Public Records Act request, or for instance, your agency for Richmond Police Department that says we'd like to know everybody that attended the training and who didn't, that's public information. So we would redact certain information from profiles, for instance, but we would be required to report that. And if you have mitigating factors that list the reason for mitigation, that would be something that may have to be released.
Okay.
So the intent of this, however, is agency specific. So it would be in this scenario, it would just be Richmond Police Department. You couldn't drill down and see which individuals have completed and not completed. But as Jim pointed out, we do get regular Public Records Act requests saying which officers did not complete.
Sure.
Which dispatchers, yeah.
I agree that the transparency is important. I agree with everyone else that there's without that, by putting in historical, by something, rates, quite frankly, for a news article, and we'll probably be doing them for us, at least some folks, and they're not going to paint that picture of, well, it's going to be like, well, the CHP's only done 25% of its training, and that will be a story, and that's not the correct story, and then that's the kind of really optics that I worry they're not really solving. The issue is compliance, and that's I would worry about.
I think those are valid points. And I think the question is do we do a live dashboard essentially, which is what the suggestion is, or do we do a report after the fact where an agency could look at and that information could still be requested at any time. We just wouldn't necessarily it'd be more raw data that would be released versus the after the fact. So again, we're open to the suggestions that will go forth to the commission on your feelings, and I think it's pretty consistent, the feelings on it. And then we'll take the direction from the commission tomorrow. If there's something they want us to take action or make some changes to, definitely.
With regards to the EDI entry for mitigating factors, I guess the question is to what degree of specificity does Post need to know what the mitigating factor is? Could there be a category, mitigating factors would contain military leave, family leave, workers' comp. It could exist of a number of different categories, and the agency's just reporting it's a mitigating factor, whereas Post may not know the specificity of it, and then it's not a PRA issue that would be released.
So we talked about that as well as being an option where we could just have them mitigate the fact that they were not able to train, and then any kind of request that comes in as a CPRA from media or somebody, whoever's interested, we would just be deferring them back to the agency to say they'll have to explain the reasons. And that could be as simple as their personnel, really, your own legal counsel to say whether that's information that can be released or not. So that's certainly a valid point that we also considered as an option to try to mitigate identifying that somebody's out sick or somebody's on administrative leave that's maybe pending getting terminated, and that's a personnel related issue. It's not a public related issue. So valid point, sir.
Okay, any additional questions or comments on this item? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now go to item B12, and at this time, I'll call upon Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler, Certification Bureau, to provide a report on ineligible peace officers.
Back. This information is actually presented previously. It was combined with B5. That was the 34 was the number of officers that are on the current ineligibility list. And again, that is the individuals who were convicted of a felony prior to January 1st, 2022. Individuals we're required to keep information on as well as prior to the implementation of Senate Bill 2. So that's why the distinction between them.
Any other questions on that item then? If not, we will move to number B14. And Michelle Weiler again to provide a report on certification and decertification case processing.
Oh, that's me, right? Wait, I didn't think I was back.
It will be Anne Marie Dominal, Executive Director.
Sorry about the musical chairs. Okay, Chair Salazar. So this is, and members of the advisory committee, this is a snapshot of what an annual report that's going to the legislature will look like with regard to all of the serious misconduct reports and allegations that have come into post. It's a little difficult to read. What we were trying to do is give you the Penal Code Section 13512 that requires post to produce information annually to the legislature. The goal of what we're doing here is to show you what we intend to put on the website as a wrap-up report that will be a live, forward-facing, website report available to the public. The information that I think is probably of interest to you folks and then will be of interest to the public, and I want to highlight some things here, is the number of complaints, charges, and allegations that have come into post, which is different from the number of reports. So there's 23,000, almost 24,000 allegations. Again, a report may have multiple allegations. The legislature didn't ask us how many reports we've received. They asked how many allegations we've received. So there's going to be another report that I'm going to go over with you that is a little more linear in terms of the actual reports from the law enforcement agencies. Also, what's notable is that of those 23,868 allegations that have been submitted by law enforcement agencies, there are final dispositions in 10,395 of those cases. That's agency disposition, right? So the agency had a finding, and here's where those findings is kind of the result. So again, unreasonable use of force or physical abuse, demonstrating bias, abuse of power, and then so on from there of the 9 acts of serious misconduct. So this really does give you a snapshot from the agency perspective where they're seeing many of their violations. And then if we scroll over to the right a little bit, my right, these 527 allegations, those are those 1029 reports that we talked about. So some of those come from the Department of Justice, where we receive an ongoing list of felony convictions of peace officers. Some of them are as a result of a case. So I'm going to take you back to that ITS report, that immediate temporary suspension report, where I said 56% of those ITSs are as a result of some sort of felony arrest, right, or indictment. Some of those cases will ultimately become a 1029. When there's been a final judgment, they will move over to this bucket over here. So it's good to kind of tie those things together so you guys kind of get a feel where the volume's at. The other thing that I think we want to talk about is if we move down the chart a little bit. I'm challenging our CSB folks here. You guys are doing really well. Thank you. And over to the left. So the division, which is the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Division, is currently reviewing 8,806 cases. So this is where we take a report from a law enforcement agency and we review it and it becomes a case. Once it becomes a case, that's when we're doing our job, right? We're doing the review and investigation at the post level. There are 9,862 different misconduct and violations involved in that 8,800 cases. To date, on the administrative adjudication side, so this is once we've closed our investigation and we know what we're going to do with the cases, we've sent out 7 notices of intent to revoke, which means we have the intent to move forward with some sort of decertification proceeding. Of those 7 cases that we sent out, we've had 3 requests for review. So that means the peace officer has appealed. If they do not appeal within 30 days, those become default decisions and revocation. So that's that 4 you see over to the far right. We are holding a board hearing. So down at the bottom of the screen and then over to the left, we start to kind of get into what we're doing from the administrative adjudication side at the board level. There are 2 cases that are scheduled for review before the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board on December 14th. So those 2 cases will be heard in a public forum. And then those cases will, depending on the outcome of or the recommendation of that board, would move forward to the commission. There have been 6 voluntary surrenders since January 1st, 2023. And we have not had any ALJ hearings to date. So that's what that far right column represents. The bottom is a website mock-up of what will hopefully appear by the end of the year on the Post website with respect to every agency. And so if you can read that bottom display, it'll have the agency identified, number of peace officers currently employed by the agency, number of serious misconduct reports the agency has submitted, the number of cases that have resulted from those reports, meaning Post has turned them into cases. Of those cases, how many are pending with the agency and how many are pending with Post? What that means is the agency is still doing the IA, and therefore we can't move forward with it until we get the supplement from the agency. Those cases, what's happened with them? How many ITSs have resulted in the review? How many cases have been closed? How many 1029 violations? How many voluntary surrenders? And then of course, once we get to the revocations, how many revocations? So every agency will have this drill. You can drill down to all the data per agency of all the agencies reporting. This came about at the September commission meeting when the commission was interested in which agencies are reporting, which agencies aren't. Very similar to the report you just heard, is there's reasons why some agencies may not have serious misconduct reports. We have agencies that have less than a dozen peace officers employed. They may not have anything to report. So we will also show, that's why we're showing the number of peace officers employed by the agency. This is to encourage reporting, and this is to encourage transparency. So open to questions. We're going to go into a more specific profile of the investigation side under the SB2 report, but this is really just to show you what that annual report will entail.
Any questions or comments from the committee members? Well, I don't either, so thank you for the report.
Welcome.
I think we can move into item B15, which I believe is you as well.
It is.
Let's see, professional, as well as Mike Radford, Bureau Chief.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and handle Mike Radford's portion of this report today. So this is an update. We provide an update at every commission meeting on kind of all things going on with Senate Bill 2 and the work of the division, Post, etc. So I'll briefly touch on some of the highlights under the admin section of this report, which is really how are we doing on hiring? What are we doing with training? What's going on kind of divisionally with our staff? So you can go ahead and scroll forward. Thanks. So we have 103 total positions in the division. We have 52 permanent positions currently filled. So we're still working to obviously get a lot of these positions filled, and primarily with the law enforcement consultant positions. So we have 13 full-time permanent law enforcement consultants. There's 30 total in the division. We have a new bureau chief starting that will be representing our Northern Bureau, and that bureau chief is starting not December 2nd. Apologize for that. It should be January. We also are continuing to hire, in addition to the full-time permanent staff, retired annuitants. We have 9 LEC retired annuitants that are currently working for the division, and we have more than 3 in process right now. So this changes daily because it's an ongoing recruitment. The work of the RAs has been instrumental in helping us kind of get a leg up on the volume of cases. You saw 23,000, so that's a lot of cases for the number of staff that we have currently working on those investigations. I think very notable is that we finally have a full board. So middle of November, as of the 16th, there were 4 new board members appointed to the Peace Officer Standards Accountability Advisory Board. There are 9 members total. So we will be providing training for all of the members on December 13th. We're going to expose these folks to things like use of force, de-escalation, investigations, administrative discipline. Many of these folks are civilians who would not necessarily have the benefit of understanding the type of training a law enforcement officer goes through to deal with these situations, these incidents as they unfold. So it's important that they have a perspective, and we hope to give them that perspective. Obviously, one training session is not going to do the job. We're going to have to revisit this multiple times. Within that training session, though, what we are doing is trying to show them video that is use of force video or video of an incident unfolding, and what the reaction is from the officer, what the reaction is from a attending partner, what's happening on the scene. In some ways, we want to show them video where everything went right, but it never looks like it went right. Use of force never looks good. And there's always going to be someone that says, well, you could have, you should have, and why didn't you? And so it's really important for us to give them that viewpoint as well. And I want to make that clear that we're doing both. We're showing them when it goes right and when it doesn't go right and what happened. We already reviewed these stats, so we can just not glaze over it, but it's important. We have 7 notices of intent revoked, 2 cases are going before the board, 4 orders of revocation as a result of default. They didn't appeal. We move forward with the slides, please. We have done some things internally to improve expediting these cases. We recognize that with this type of volume, it's going to be a year plus before many of these cases see the public forum and that coming before a board. So what we've tried to do is expedite how we get the case to the point where we know this case is something that should move forward with decertification. There's a lot of peer review of these cases. So there's never one person making the decision, and there's multiple layers of review. We talked about that throughout the kind of development of the Senate Bill 2 internal procedures, but it's important to note that there are several bureau chiefs that get together and look at these cases and discuss whether or not we've met that threshold of clear and convincing evidence and the facts, the evidence support that something in one of those 9 acts of serious misconduct has occurred. So we're working through expediting those internal review procedures. We are also in the process of developing disciplinary guidelines. You guys would consider that maybe a bail schedule. It's if these factors are present, what is the imposition of discipline? What should we be looking for in order to seek revocation? What should we be looking for if we want to mitigate something and really suspension is more appropriate given the circumstances? So, you know, in an effort to be consistent and also to give the administrative law judges some guidance in how to render decisions in these cases, we're working on developing those disciplinary guidelines, and those will go before the commission in March. So Chair Salazar helped us in a video production that we've been working on for several months. We hope to have it released in early February, March. And what it's intended to do is speak to line staff officers. What is Senate Bill 2? What's really happening with these decertification reviews and proceedings? Kind of dispelling some of those myths and fallacies, hopefully speaking to some of the fears. And so the interviews include line level peace officers, academy directors, agency heads, internal affairs folks. Many POSAD staff participated in the videos, and there's going to be 2 separate videos. One's going to be for CPT for peace officers that are currently in the field. The other video is going to be for recruits. So it's going to speak to new officers that are at the academy recruits that are at the academy who really don't have an appreciation for who Post is. So let's start them early with an understanding of who Post is, why the relationship between the officer and Post is now more of a fact that they're going to have to be familiar with, and they're going to have to work with Post to get their certification and to retain their certification. So as I mentioned, we hope to get those videos out early 2024. We think they're going to be impactful. And I don't know if Chairman Salazar, if you have any comments to that effect.
I would just say a couple of things. I appreciate the approach that you described, the training with the POSAB board. I think that's important to make sure that they have both kind of perspectives to those incidents. But with regards to the video, and I know we saw some brochures at a prior meeting as well. I just think those two things are very important. And really the data that we've seen in the last two presentations are important for officers and deputies that are out there doing the work to have a clear sense of what is happening with SB2. That's a lot of cases. There's still a lot of work to do, I know, by the post staff, but at this point, 7, although we'd like to see none, but 7 revocations. But I think understanding that there's good due process and the people reviewing these cases are doing it with that level of care is important. So I think that hopefully the video and the brochures and this information will be helpful to those that are already in the field or those that we're trying to recruit to come into it who have some concerns. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for your support on the video as well. In terms of training, it's not just the board members that need ongoing training. I think we all do. There has been some notion of who's actually doing these reviews, who's doing these investigations. There were a number of officers that thought that they were laypersons that were looking at these cases. And so it was important for us to recognize that that's a concern, that they need to know that these are former peace officers and those that are in law enforcement that are actually conducting the reviews. To that end, we also want to make sure we're investing in that staff. So that staff, the law enforcement consultants, as well as the other analysts that work in the division, are being afforded training with regard to interview and interrogation, what a complete investigation looks like, what should we require of ourselves in terms of how we're reporting out to the board and the commission, the findings, the investigations, the summaries. We are also putting together a course or guidelines in the future for law enforcement community and profession regarding I would say not internal affairs, but investigations, report writing, et cetera. So that's something that we're trying to do to standardize this to some degree. We receive internal affairs reports in various forms, some extremely in-depth, some are very well written, and there's a lot Post can do with them. There are some that leave a lot of gaps and a lot of room for further review and investigation. So we're hoping to standardize that to some degree. We are also continuing to train law enforcement agencies with Mark 43. We're doing some of that training online, and we're also continuing to do some of that training in person. This last month, I think we were down in Los Angeles and we did training at several agencies. So the need's still out there, and we will still meet that need in person if that comes to pass. We can move forward. All right, so here's what everyone's waiting for, statistics. So in the last slide that we reported on statistics, it was really more what the legislature was interested in terms of types of misconduct, types of allegations that are being filed with Post. This is just the volume. And this really takes into account public complaints. It takes into account what we consider agency supplemental reports. So the stats kind of speak for themselves. So once an agency submits their initial misconduct report, there's several supplements that may follow, right? So that 26,000, the reason it doesn't align with the report you saw earlier is it includes all the supplements that the agency submits if there's additional information that they have to submit after the initial report to Post. The other thing that is notable here is that we've closed 5,500 cases. Many of those cases are retro, non-actionable cases. What that means is they were cases that occurred prior to January 1st, 2023. And they were not one of the three areas that we could move forward on with the look back period, which was unreasonable use of force, deadly use of force likely to cause SBI or death, sexual assault or dishonesty. If those cases did not involve one of those three acts of serious misconduct, post could not act on those cases. However, we did require agencies to report those cases. There's somewhat of a repository of that information in the Mark 43 database. And again, these are the top three areas of serious misconduct allegations reported by the law enforcement agencies. Questions?
I have a question on the, for the video for the cadets or the recruits. Do we anticipate that going into LD1 or towards the end of the academy before the cadets graduate to officer?
We're talking about LD1 being a part of LD1, that they would receive the literature and they would have to watch the video in the class. Yeah. That would have to be, obviously, the commission would have to require that, but that's our intent. Yes.
I want to go back to the board that's going to be reviewing the videos, the use of force videos, what's good and what's bad. I'd like to make a recommendation that they use a use of force simulator. Actually get behind a gun and use a simulator so they understand what we go through. I think it would give them a different perspective, and I volunteer my staff and my simulators to do that. I mean, you only have 9 board members. I think that's something that they should look at.
Under consideration, thank you. There was some discussion of that early on about having a simulator, and they would have to volunteer to do that, but yeah.
I make my
appreciate that.
board members go through that. It's an
Yeah.
eye opener.
I can imagine. Thank you.
Any more comments from the committee?
I had one more question. Thank you. If we can go back to talking about the standardization of the IA process, are you looking at giving each agency a template to follow, or just a guideline of what elements you're looking to see in each IA report so that the SB2 committee is set up for success?
So very good question. I think that's open for discussion, and that's why we're bringing together a group of subject matter experts. Does it make sense just to do guidelines, or does it make sense to be more prescriptive in the outcomes? So a course is extremely detailed, and that would be very prescriptive, but maybe somewhere between guidelines with some sort of tangible outcomes that are adopted by regulation, to provide a little more guidance and standardization to some of these internal affairs reports. And again, we're starting these workshops early in 2024 and bringing in a group of subject matter experts to discuss just that. What makes sense and what would be, I think, more viable in terms of requiring this of all agencies. Yeah.
Any additional questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much for that report. A lot of information. Okay, at this time, out of deference to our court reporter, we're going to take a short break. 5 or 10 minutes, okay? Or so we'll take 10 minutes. Services Manager Megan Polos, Executive Office, to provide a report on the legislative update.
Good afternoon. Before I get started with my update, I just want to give a disclaimer to some of our newer committee members. So Post as a governmental agency we do not take positions on legislation. We are neutral. Our role is really to provide information, technical assistance, and programmatic assistance as far as implementation goes for some of these bills. So the legislative session ended on September 15th, and the governor had until October 14th to sign or veto any legislation. And today I'm just going to go over a few bills that were signed this year that will affect Post. And there is a complete list of bills that Post monitored this last session in the commission agenda packet. So the first significant bill was Assembly Bill 355. This is the bill to really fix the rifle training issue that we had in the academy. It allows recruits to possess the required firearm to receive necessary rifle training, where previously they had to graduate and then come back to do that training because they had to be a peace officer to possess that firearm. And one significant piece of that bill is it only applies to sponsored recruits. It does not apply to those who are not currently hired. And the other piece of that is they have to be under supervision of a firearms instructor. And that bill becomes effective on January 1 of 2024. Assembly Bill 360. This bill prohibits the use of the term excited delirium from being recognized as a valid medical term or cause of death. Coroners and medical examiners cannot state this as a reason for death on a death certificate. And peace officers are prohibited from using the term to describe an individual on an incident report. They may describe the characteristics of the individual, but they cannot describe it as excited delirium. And that law becomes effective on January 1, 2024. And I believe a bulletin from Post will be published soon. Assembly Bill 443. This will require the Post Commission to define bias conduct and require law enforcement agencies to use that definition in any investigation into a bias-related complaint or incident. It would also require Post to develop more comprehensive guidance for agencies on performing effective internet and social media screenings of applicants. And this bill is a direct result of the state auditor's report from 2022. And that law has an implementation date of January 1, 2026. And we have a few more. Assembly Bill 449. This bill requires that all law enforcement agencies adopt a hate crimes policy using the content of the Post Hate Crime Model Policy Framework. Right now, it's only required if you update your current policy or develop a new one. Now it's as of January 1 of 2024, it will be required to update according to the Post Policy Framework. In that bill, there were also requirements that policies and the required brochures be submitted to DOJ. There is a rollout period for that submission, but DOJ will be the agency that oversees and reviews those policies. And Post has updated the guidelines according to the new or upcoming statutes, and that will be distributed to the field as well soon. On the other side of the house, Senate Bill 449. So this was a bill to clean up some of the language in Senate Bill 2 for Post, mainly just to help us with further implementation of the law. And that bill becomes effective on January 1 of 2024. And then the last bill I want to discuss is Senate Bill 700. So this bill was in addition to, I believe it's Assembly Bill 2188 from 2 years ago. This bill makes it unlawful for an employer to request information from an applicant relating to the applicant's prior use of cannabis. It also makes it unlawful for any employer to discriminate against a person in hiring, termination, or any term or condition of employment because of the person's use of cannabis off the job and away from the workplace. This bill does not affect an employer's ability to obtain and consider an applicant's criminal conviction history. Post is sending out a bulletin by the end of next week on this topic, because obviously we've gotten a lot of attention from this. And Post has already updated its personal history statement to reflect this law, and that is currently on the Post website. But this law becomes effective on January 1 of 2024. So that completes all the bills I want to discuss. This is the end of, well, this last session was the end of the 2-year cycle, well, the end of the first year of the 2-year cycle. So meaning that bills that were introduced and maybe didn't pass through this session still have the opportunity to come forward again next session. So some of the bills that we saw that failed this year can come back next year as is. So the legislature is out until January 3rd. So until then, we'll see what happens, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions or comments from the committee on this item on the legislative update? You answered my question with the updated PHS for SB 700, so thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, the next item will be from the Basic Training Bureau, item D1, and at this time I'll call upon Bureau Chief Brian South from the Professional Conduct Central Bureau and Staff Services Manager Jennifer Hardesty, Basic Training Bureau, who will provide a report on the proposed changes to the Post guidelines for student safety and certified courses.
Good afternoon. So this is a presentation on the update to the Post guidelines for student safety in certified courses. Those guidelines were revised in June 2020 and incorporated by reference in Commission Regulation 1052, which is requirements for course certification, as well as Regulation 1059, which is requirements for basic course certification. Regulation 1059 became operative in April 2021. So after that revision, so the current guidelines don't refer to Commission Regulation 1059. The Basic Training Bureau also identified some areas in need of updating in regard to instructor-student ratios for regular basic course testing, as well as certain should and shall language that was changed in the 2020 revision. So Post staff, in consultation with subject matter experts, also identified, reviewed, and updated a limited number of other areas within the guidelines, including the areas of scenario training and event simulations, tactical operations training, and bicycle training. And as a result of that, the proposed changes include adding references to Regulation 1059, the conversion of certain should and shall language and instructor-student ratios related to student safety concerns, as well as an updated definition of the term instructor in the guidelines. Additional changes included updates to safety considerations for training that involve non-lethal training ammunition, safety considerations in the use of role players and safety officers in scenario-based training and testing, as well as safety considerations relating to the use of virtual reality in training and bicycle training, specifically electric bicycles, commonly known as e-bikes. We did receive 2 public comments relating to these proposed updates, and those were included in your agenda material. One of the comments was non-substantive, just a change to correct the legal term for electric bicycles, and that has been reflected. That comment also supported the inclusion of a requirement that e-bikes used in training are compliant with the vehicle code. That requirement is in the updated guidelines and is consistent with the subject matter experts' recommendations. The other public comment related to a suggestion that the guidelines not require e-bikes and law enforcement training to be compliant with the vehicle code due to a maximum of 750 watts for the electric motor that's outlined in the vehicle code. The SMEs had concurred with the requirement to be compliant with the vehicle code, so that is what is still reflected in the updated guidelines. And Post staff felt that compliance with the vehicle code definition of an e-bike was prudent, and that any changes to the vehicle code itself to allow a higher wattage motor would be outside of the Post purview. So in conclusion, the proposed changes to the guidelines will address areas of concern identified by the Basic Training Bureau and update several other areas within the guidelines. If the commission were to concur, the appropriate action for them would be to make a motion to approve the changes. And if that happens, the next step in the rulemaking process would be to submit final documents to the Office of Administrative Law, including our staff response to the public comments. The commission could also modify the proposed changes or take any other course of action they feel is appropriate. That is my report. Any questions?
Thank you for that report. Any questions or comments from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move to item D2 under Basic Training Bureau. And at this time, we'll call upon Staff Services Manager Jennifer Hardesty from the Basic Training Bureau to provide a report on the proposed changes to training and testing specifications of Learning Domain 35, firearms and chemical agents.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So in June of 2023, BTB or Basic Training Bureau, we submitted proposed changes for commission consideration related to LD 35 firearms and chemical agents. That was ultimately approved at the June 8th commission meeting, and we started the rulemaking process, which led with the public comment period. One public comment was received, and that requires to be resubmission back to the commission for consideration. So currently the training and testing specifications do not require the use of only iron sights in training, nor do they require or restrict the use of pistol mounted optics in basic courses. As PMOs become more prevalent, the subject matter experts felt it was important to address the need for students to effectively gain sight alignment using the primary sighting system, whether that be iron sights or a PMO. The proposed change does not add the requirement or restriction for the type of primary sighting system to be utilized. So that will be left up to each presenter to determine if they will allow PMOs to be utilized in training or not. The commission will be presented with two options. The first would be to take no further action, and we will continue to proceed with the rulemaking process. The second option would be to rescind their original approval of the proposed change, and then there would be no change made to the training and testing specifications. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions, comments related to this item? I will say I was contacted by our local academy who was in support of the proposed changes as presented by post staff. And I would support that as well. And I think it's a good option, and ultimately up to the agencies to make sure they qualify as required by the agencies. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Okay, at this time, we will move on to the Certification Bureau and receive a presentation on item E1. And I will call upon Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler from the Certification Bureau to provide a report on the proposed changes to Commission Regulation 1208, temporary suspension of certification.
Yes, good afternoon. So before you, if you have it in front of you, the original adopted version of Commission Regulation 1208 was pretty sparse in its language. It basically said that, well, I'll just read it to you. Following an order of immediate temporary suspension pursuant to Penal Code Section 13.5.10.8D, the division shall take the following steps. Notify the involved peace officer and agency head in writing. The notification shall specify the basis of the executive director's determination. The commission shall schedule proceedings in accordance with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. That's it. And then once we started actually issuing these, we did get questions from officers. How do I appeal this? And we also, at the same time, we're already kind of working on plans for providing them with clarification on what their rights are to respond to this. And so this item was originally approved by the commission in the March meeting. And then after that approval, there were additional revisions for clarity that we, that we added to the proposed amendments. So now there's a great deal more information in here for officers. We provide them with information on, one, the right to respond to the immediate temporary suspension, when that response must be submitted to post, and how to submit that to post. We also incorporated an advisement that the officer can submit an appeal to the executive director. The executive director is obligated to take that appeal into consideration and can either act on that to withdraw. As Anne Marie mentioned, we did have 6 withdrawals already this year, or let the suspension stand until we can further review the case and make a determination on the case itself. And we also adopted a subsection that includes the officer's rights and responsibilities to notify post if and when the charges against them, if there were charges against them that led to the ITS, were dismissed, because then we would no longer have grounds, potentially no longer have grounds for that immediate temporary suspension. So that's the changes that we are proposing to Commission Regulation 1208. Gives it more meat, more information for the officers that are subject to ITSs. Any questions on that?
Questions or comments on this item from the committee? Again, I think it's having more information is good, and this just clarifies the process for officers is what to expect and what their role and due process is. So I think good item, and thank you for your work on this. Okay, we'll move on to item.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Just one question. When this gets mailed, to the officers at the agency, or does it get sent to their home record? How does that work?
So right now, a copy is being sent to their agency head. The officer is getting a copy mailed to them, priority mail, as well as certified mail to whatever address we can currently find on record for them through the public searches that are available to us. Commission Regulation 1215 just went into effect, where we are requiring peace officers in California to designate an official address of record to receive direct correspondence from post. And that can be the address of their current employing agency or a personal address, a PO box, and that personal address can be their own address, a family member that they trust to deliver their mail. It's their discretion there. And just, I guess, larger agencies have asked us about whether, so for example, the CHP is a good example. What we have on file as a mailing address for CHP would be up here in Sacramento, but somebody could be assigned to work in Los Angeles. There is an option for them to select that same option where they could select an alternate address of record. They could select that, and instead of putting a personal home address, they could put the address of the division where they're working. So in Los Angeles, for example.
Is there what's the time amount that they have to respond by for this?
35 days, I believe.
35 days.
Like
Okay.
35 days. Yeah. ITS. 35 days.
That's both. Thank you.
I mean, Mr. Chair, a couple of things. One, maybe we could touch on the address of record a little bit in terms of it is a new thing, so to speak, that was addressed by the commission. A bulletin went out probably 2 weeks ago saying, if you have a different address, give us a different address or it's going to the department. I believe as of yesterday, we had like 2,500 of 100,000 officers that have responded to that. They're not required to, because it will default back to the department. But if they want a different address, they need to go into the system and provide that. And then also in regards to the first question, the letter, the ITS letter, notification letter also goes to the district attorney. So it's the DA, the agency head, and the person, correct?
I'm sorry, correction. There's 14 days to respond to an immediate temporary suspension.
All right. Thank you.
We have so many deadlines.
See that.
Okay, thank you for those clarifications. If nothing further, we'll move on to item E2. And that will also be Bureau Chief Michelle Wetter, to provide a report on proposed amendments to Commission Regulation 1202, Peace Officer Certificates.
Yes, so when we first implemented all of these new regulations for implementation of Senate Bill 2 requirements, we separated Commission Regulation 1011 out for dispatchers and records supervisors, which is the next item, and peace officer certification and their professional certificates. So this is a lot of cleanup language to that initial proposed or initially adopted regulation. We made some changes to stipulate specifically for police chiefs, if they're coming from out of state. They won't necessarily have a basic certificate for California. They have some time to obtain that, and during that period, they would be issued a proof of eligibility until they meet the requirements to obtain that basic certificate. And then we also removed an exception that was in regulation for agencies who are not post-participating but required their officers to obtain post-basic certificates, because that's no longer applicable. All specified peace officers now in California have to have a proof of eligibility or basic certificate, so that exception is no longer necessary. We made a little amendment to correct a reference. We incorrectly referenced Commission Regulation 1201, and it should have been 1205 related to serious misconduct. We're proposing to make an amendment to include disqualifications related to Government Code Section 1029 as a reason not to approve an application for a professional certificate. And then we've had a lot of confusion with regard to course completion certificates and the professional certificates or basic certificate. So we added some language to clarify that those are distinct certificates. And then just some cleanup, renumbering, adding some clarity regarding education requirements, and also spelling out that proofs of eligibility and basic certificates can also be canceled by post for specified reasons. Right now, it only states professional certificates. So we wanted to make sure that the officers out there knew that it also applied to basic certificates and proofs of eligibility. And those specified reasons are providing false information, misrepresenting their credentials, that sort of thing. And those are all our proposed amendments to 1202. Any questions?
Questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, thank you for that report, and we will move on to item E3, which will be Bureau Chief Michelle Weiler again. I provide a report on the proposed amendment to Commission Regulation 1011, professional certificates for public safety dispatchers and records supervisor.
Again, so these proposed amendments are cleanup language changes, again, being a little bit more specific on education requirements, correcting references to subsections that were removed or no longer exist after removing the peace officer certification information, and also removing any references to qualifications for peace officer certificates. There were some that were still inadvertently left behind in Commission Regulation 1011, so cleanup language to remove those, as well as to specifically grandfather in dispatchers who received a dispatcher certificate. That is no longer being issued now. It's a dispatcher basic certificate. And so some of our newer analysts were not issuing or were denying applications for the intermediate and advanced certificates because it didn't specifically say dispatcher basic. So now we're clarifying that as well. And also clarifying that you have to have the dispatcher basic in order to qualify for the intermediate and advanced certificates. You can't just jump that and apply. And then additional cleanup language related to certificates for records supervisors.
Could you just repeat that last sentence?
Additional cleanup language as they relate to records supervisor certificates.
Thank you.
And that's it. Any questions?
No questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Okay, we will now move on to our final presentation, item F1. And at this time, I'll call upon Assistant Executive Director Anne-Marie Delmanal from the Executive Office, who will provide a report on the review of serious misconduct cases related to bias and sexual assault.
Thank you. We can go ahead and pull up a presentation on this one. So you probably noted in a couple of the earlier presentations, demonstrating bias is the second most reported act of serious misconduct. Sexual assault also, there's a number of cases. And these two in particular have really caused the division to have to look at what types of cases we're moving forward with decertification. Again, looking at the fact that the legislature intended for post to take decertification actions on serious misconduct, which is different than an infraction or perhaps a policy violation, that we really want to put some framework around sexual assault and demonstrating bias. And so that's why these two have been called out, and we're asking the commission for some additional direction. And what I mean by that, and I'll start with sexual assault, Penal Code section, and we can go to the first slide, please. Penal Code section 832.7 defines what a sexual act is, and a sexual assault in particular. And it includes the propositioning for commission of any sexual act. In 13510.8, the definition actually refers back to 832.7, as you can see up top there, Penal Code section 13510.8B4. In our regulations, we did not touch that portion of the definition. However, we added that it extends to acts committed amongst members of any law enforcement agency. Therefore, these aren't just acts that are perpetuated on the public. And what we've received now in terms of types of cases is where there is a consensual relationship between two people who work at the same agency, who've maybe have made a poor decision to act on that relationship while on duty, and then that gets reported to post. And there again is that the type of misconduct that the commission would like post to move forward with for decertification, recognizing that the agency itself has some role in that discipline, and they've violated agency policy, perhaps violated, the recording of their work time, but did they commit a serious infraction and serious misconduct? So we're looking for guidance from the commission that these acts that are a consensual relationship between two people of the same agency are not the type of serious misconduct the legislature intended for the purposes of decertification. Any questions on that one before I move into bias, demonstrating bias? Comments? Okay. So we can move to the next slide. In terms of demonstrating bias, what becomes tricky in this definition is demonstrating. What does that mean? What types of things demonstrate a bias that would render a peace officer perhaps unable to serve safely and efficaciously to all members of the public? So we looked at the website definition as what is demonstrating. You can see the definition here does not go into the verb demonstrating in terms of what acts or actions must occur or must be part of the fact pattern in order for us to establish there's been some demonstration of bias. Next slide, please. So the Penal Code section, the 13510.8, very broad. What we also need to consider is recently in this last legislative session, Assembly Bill 443 was passed. Assembly Bill 443 now requires post to establish guidelines for agencies when they're conducting investigations related to conduct of bias. So we have to take into consideration what is the bias conduct definition under AB 443 that now exists in Penal Code section 13510.6, in addition to the Penal Code section that we have under the one of the serious acts of misconduct. So we've been grappling with this. What is demonstrating bias, and how do we, in fact, not narrow the scope of the statute, but get to the heart of what was intended in terms of the type of conduct that the commission should act on. So next slide, please. One more. Sorry about that. Okay. So the infinite wisdom that exists in our Legal Affairs Bureau, they put their heads together and they've come up with a definition that we would like for the commission to consider. And that is what is beneath existing 1205A5, which is the same statutory definition of demonstrating bias in 13510.8. But what exists in bold would be new. And so I'll give you an opportunity, or I can read that into the record, whatever you would like for me to do. I think what's important to point out here is we're talking about the types of perhaps acts or actions that the officer may have demonstrated, and tying that to when such words, actions, or other conduct would lead a reasonable person to conclude that the officer has not fairly and impartially performed, or will not fairly or impartially perform his or her law enforcement duties. So I've been asked to provide some kind of maybe global examples. And I'm sure you're all aware of some of those examples that are out there now, where cases involved an exchange of text messages between two officers, or an exchange of an off-color joke, or some sort of meme, etc., that becomes part of an overall case. Is that in and of itself the demonstration of bias that was intended in 13510.8? So what we were grappling with is, was there some way that we could look at these cases and the totality of the circumstances to include the conduct of the officer related to the speech, or related to some other underlying cause for someone to claim that the officer has demonstrated bias? So this is what we were attempting to do with the definition that Legal Affairs Bureau and Toby and his team put together. It may not be in perfect form yet, but it should start the discussion and get folks thinking about how are we going to move forward with these cases, and what are the challenges we're going to face, because there will be challenges. So that's what the discussion is before the commission tomorrow. We're going to ask for them to consider the definition, probably bring this back in March for a vote, unless they feel comfortable with doing something more formative tomorrow.
Okay, any questions or comments from the committee members?
I would just take issue with the term closed-mindedness. It's very subjective. Don't know. At least these other words that are spread out through the paragraph, at least, are those that are understandable by folks that are doing this job. Prejudice, intolerance, contempt. Closed-mindedness can be closed-minded about a lot of things.
That's a very good point.
And doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Thank you.
So that would be my only suggestion from the definition for the full commission.
I think that's a good point as well. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Yeah, I think aside from that one term, it's a better definition of what we've had, so provide some clarification. So anything else? Okay. Thank you for that report. Right, that concludes the presentations from staff. And at this time, we'll move on to the advisory committee member reports. This is the time for advisory committee members to report on any items from their respective organizations for the commission to either consider for post staff. And so Benjamin, I'll start with you from PORAC.
Nothing to report at this time.
Chief?
I don't have anything to really report other than it's not necessarily a report. I'm really not sure where to go about this, maybe for the good of the cause, but AB 89 was just signed or pushed through for the College of Chancellors, and how is that going to affect our academies moving forward and then our officers moving forward at the same time. And I know, sir, we already had a conversation outside. I was just throwing it out there for more the benefit of all I'm not sure if this is the realm to do that in or not for the report or agency. If not, then I have nothing to report.
Like us to address AB 89 and the status. Megan, would you come up and help me with it since we're both part of this? Would you like to start, Megan, and then I will add to it if need be.
Well, if I could, so for my report, I was also going to talk about AB 89, so I'll jump in real quick so you have all of the information. So I'll take cuts and lines if you don't mind, Sheila. So from our concerns from the California Police Chiefs Association, in reviewing the AB 89 report, a few things that we're hoping to make sure happen, and I believe we've been in touch with Post and shared these, but making sure that academy units do count towards the modern policing degree across the board, and then some clarification with some and/or language, some concerns about whether it's the modern policing degree and a bachelor's degree, or is it or a bachelor's degree. And then just the realistic timeline of 2025 at this point, and thinking realistically that needs to be extended. And it does have impacts. 2025 is very close. And it does have potential impacts on recruitment as we start getting closer to that date. So, and then I also had a question with on a different piece of it, but what happens to a police officer who doesn't attain the AB 89 requirements within the 2 years of being hired as a police officer? So does that then become a certification issue? And if they don't attain that requirement, are they then not certified? Or what happens if we hire someone and then within 2 years they're supposed to complete that? Is that the agency's responsibility, or is that going to be Post that says they don't meet certification requirements?
You start, Megan, or would you like me to start?
I don't know where to start.
Okay, I'll start. I'll start. Thank you for coming up to support me,
course.
Megan, because
Of
Megan's
course.
getting all the questions
Yeah.
now. So I appreciate Megan coming up here. So just to give you guys a little background, myself and Carrie Holler, or Bureau Chief Carrie Holler, sat on the Chancellor's Office Task Force. I co-chaired it with a professor from one of the colleges. The report is out. It took a good 15 months for the report to come out. So the way AB 89 is written now, as the chair has pointed out, it requires a modern policing degree, which is yet to be created by the community colleges, and a bachelor's degree. Our understanding from the author of AB 89, his staff, that word "and" was meant to be an "or," not an "and," but it reads an "and." And depending on how you read it, different people have different opinions as to whether it's truly an "and" or an "or." So that is one of the issues in AB 89 that's causing some concern, aside from the modern policing degree not being developed yet and the 2025 deadline. The other significant issue is it requires that you have the modern policing degree and the bachelor's degree prior to appointment as a peace officer. That's the other sticking point. So the Chancellor's Office in their report had a number of recommendations, including that credit be provided for certain portions of the academy training. So they went through the academy training and some of the constitutional law instruction and other things they feel is also covered during instruction during certain portions of AA degrees. So part of their recommendation was that there should be some credit provided for going through the regular basic course. And I believe the discussion was that it should be, in the 25, 26 credit unit category for the 60 completion units for a modern policing degree. That was one of their recommendations. The other recommendation was that it should be that modern policing degree should be provided both in person and online in asynchronous fashion, so that peace officers could get the training off duty, or once they're done with their shift, if that's the case. There's a lot of discussion about the prior to appointment, as well as prior to the basic certificate. I believe The discussion was that it should be prior to the basic, but I don't believe that made it into the actual document, if I'm not mistaken, but there was discussion about that. There was a subsequent bill, and I can't recall the bill number, Megan, if you remember it, that the same author proposed last year that had some significant changes, which I think were a little bit easier for everybody to execute. So the significant changes were that it removed the word and changed it to or. It also changed the deadline, I believe, from 2025 to 2027, if I'm not mistaken. And it also changed the language to prior to appointment, from prior to appointment to prior to the basic, which we also, suggested to them during that process. It shouldn't read prior to basic because not everybody's required to have a basic, that it should be within the basic or 24 months, which is required by law. So that bill ended up dying. It was a gut and amend. The author had to pull it, explain that to us, that they were pulling it to create another bill or create other language for another completely different. I believe it was a DMV bill, if I'm not mistaken, that they gutted that bill for. But the indication that we got from the staff was that they were going to reintroduce it this year, that they wanted to clean it up. That remains to be seen if they're going to do that or not. But we hope that they do, because I think it'll make it a little easier on us in terms of if it is prior to the basic certificate and how we're going to police that, so to speak, to answer the chair's question. I believe, let's hypothetically say that does get changed and somebody is appointed without having a modern policing degree or a bachelor's degree. They're going to be issued a proof of eligibility once they're appointed. And then when it's time for their basic certificate, because we've probably already gone and reviewed their file to make sure they were appointed properly. When they submit their request for a basic certificate, we're likely going to have to go back and check, not maybe physically go back and check, but ensure that they've received the modern policing degree or the bachelor's degree prior to the basic being issued. The question then is, what happens if the person doesn't? Then they won't be issued the basic and they can't work. If they're beyond that 24-month window. So that's the status. It's definitely causing some questions, some confusion perhaps out there, but our responsibility really was to participate in the task force in terms of providing recommendations and guidance, which we did over the course of 15 months. And really now just to execute on the implementation of this minimum standard being increased. The other aspect was changing the age from 18 to 21, and that's already in place. So we're kind of in a wait and see posture. I believe the chancellor's office, they're, I assume, working frantically on building that course. Because right now, everybody's got to have it by 2025. And we're getting close. It takes a while to get it. So that's the status. Did I miss anything, Megan, or anything?
No,
you
I
should
just wanted to
add?
clarify one thing. So the way that AB 89 reads is that Post has to adopt the educational requirements that come out of this report by the community colleges within 2 years of submission to the legislature. So they just submitted that report. So we're kind of going off November 1 of 2025 for that reason. I think there's been a little bit of confusion about the year and the date. So I just but the way that the bill and the law currently reads is it's 2 years from that submission of the report that Post has to adopt the recommendations on the educational requirements. But as Manny said, the legislative intent, and if you read through any of the analysis of AB 89 as it went through the process, was to be an or. So we know that was the intent. So hopefully that's something that they will fix. And my message has been that we have time to fix it. So that's all I have to add.
Any other questions, comments?
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I don't as well.
Quick question. seeing as how they're building this airplane while they're trying to fly it again, what is the time frame, or what is the curriculum for this course that they're going to require? How long is it going to be? Is it going to be part of the post academy? Obviously not. I mean, how long is this thing going to take for somebody to get this? I call it a degree, I guess, at any point. Have they set some guidelines for that at all?
So I don't believe there's a time frame in AB 89 for them to actually develop and deploy the modern policing degree for the chancellor's office. It's the recommendations and then that they have to develop it. So there is no timing answer in that regard. There was a lot of discussion during the task force meetings as to the way the law is written now. You have to have it prior to the basic, or I'm sorry, prior to appointment. So do they go to the academy first and then they have to go to a community college before they're appointed? Or do they go to the community college first and then go through the academy? I think they were leaning towards the way it's written now is that they would have these credits in place before they go to the academy. I think should the legislation change, I think the anticipation was they would go through the academy and then go back through and get the college credits.
I guess that's kind of where I was leaning, because we had this conversation quite a while back when this came up originally, is that you're going to take our pool of what we had and you're shrinking our pool of officers that are going to be able to become officers at this point. Because if you require that before they go to the academy, they're going to find another direction of employment. They're going to kill us. They need to really take a look at how they're going to do this process, and that absolutely is going to kill our pool of people to even get them employed, because we're a small community. We're trying to get kids right out of high school to work in the jail for a couple of years so that when they turn 20 and a half, we can put them in the academy. When they turn 21, now they can carry a firearm. And you're taking that ability for us to get peace officers away. They really need to look at this. This is, I said it before, I'll say it again. I think it's a bad idea for them to have that. The police academy has been doing a great job for many, many years. And I think they're adding to the police academy is giving our officers and deputies enough knowledge to do the job. I don't understand why the chancellor's office is coming in and saying they need more education. I would still like to see some statistics that show that somebody that has a college education is a better cop than somebody who doesn't. I think they're killing us. They're absolutely killing the small departments. I mean, even the AA that's been required by a lot of departments already shot their pools down. But to counties that don't have that ability, it's going to cause a problem. And there was some other language in that AB 89 of disadvantaged communities where they were going to be getting assistance and stuff. And I haven't looked at it lately. I don't know if that language is still in there or not. And you're nodding your head. Yes, it is.
It is.
Now I, again, have people in my community that don't fit that criteria of disadvantaged community. So they're not going to be able to get any help. They're not going to be able to get employed. So I will say it publicly. I think this whole chancellor's program is a bad idea. It's going to kill the pool for peace officers in the state of California as this progresses.
I may just a couple of comments or opinions. So the timing of it obviously is very challenging, right? In this day and age when I think most law enforcement agencies are having recruiting challenges across the country and really across the globe for law enforcement. So the timing of it makes it a challenge. The bill's signed, so it's not a bill, it's a law. So now it's up to us to kind of execute. Should the bill remain the same? I think one of the challenges for departments and for the individuals will be using, let's say, Calaveras County as an example. if you have an individual who you want to hire who needs to have that modern policing degree or a bachelor's degree, you're probably not going to sponsor that person to an academy because you're going to be paying their salary when they go through the RVC. And now they got to go and get the education, which may take, probably a year, 6 months or a year to get 30 extra credits. I don't think you're going to be wanting to pay their salary. So you're probably not going to sponsor a lot of them is my gut. You're going to tell them, hey, go get your college credits first and then come back, which causes some additional, challenges, so to speak. But it is right now what it is. They've told us they're going to clean it up. I think personally speaking, I think if it does go back to the way they had it before, it'll be much more palatable where somebody goes to an academy, then they have 2 years to get 30 credits and they can do them online and have their AA degree, which also the legislation requires that it kind of be transferable to a bachelor's degree if they want to go get a bachelor's following that. But that kind of died on the vine. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not going after the messenger.
We don't write the law.
I'm not going after the messenger at all. I'm just saying that the process, if they can fix the process where they can get their basic and then have that 2-year window to get that other degree, I think that's a better way to go. We're still going to lose people because you're going to have folks that are not going to do that process. But the problem is it goes back to the beginning. We're not going to get the applicants because they've already put this in place. We're not going to get the applicants that we would have in the past. They've caused a lot of problems. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to realize a lot more problems because they're not going to be able to hire the cops. And again, it goes back to what I told you before about my department. We have education incentives. Now, my education incentives, I pay maybe a dozen cops out of almost 60 cops, that education incentive. Now, my budget is going to go way through the roof because now I'm going to have to give everybody that education incentive. So it's not just the education part of it, it's everything else that goes along with it. That I don't think was thought out very well. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments on this item? Yes, Benjamin.
I'll just add, I think it's up to us, especially between now and mid-February, whether it's with Cal Sheriffs, PORAC, or Cal Chiefs, to reach out to that initial author of the bill. And I think there's going to, my understanding is there's some opportunity for some cleanup. And so at least for the intermediary and for the purposes of post, so that this does not all get gummed up, we should really push that a lot at our respective organizations because it's clearly a problem. CHP is the same, that's what I plan to do. And I just think that's what we have to do for the short term, at least, to address it. Because it's, again, the description of building the airplane in the sky is perfect.
Okay, any other questions, comments on that item? All right, if not, we will return to committee member reports, and we left off with a dispatch with Shayla Cottrell.
I don't have anything at this time, but thank you.
Sheriff, anything from Cal Sheriffs?
No more than I could talk about.
And Mr. Waltz from Capto.
My report, my organization that I've been representing, Capto, California Association of Police Training Officers, has been rebranded, refreshed, restructured to CPTMA, California Police Training Managers Association. There's a statewide executive director, and then each chapter has their leadership. Right now, there are 3 very active chapters. There's the South Central San Joaquin Valley, the North San Joaquin Valley, and the Central Coast areas. The meetings are being attended very well. They're starting to include other people other than training managers, including field training officers and people who have some training portion of specialized units. And so you'll be hearing more about that later on, but you won't be hearing it from me because this will be my last meeting. There's an item before the commission to replace me with Lieutenant Brent Stocker, has over 30 years of law enforcement. He's currently commanding the training unit at Fresno Sheriff's Office, and he's an instructor in several advanced officer and basic academy courses. So if he is approved, you'll be seeing him in this place instead of me. And he's very, very competent, very, very good guy to very thoughtful and analytical. He'll be a good addition to this committee.
All right, thank you. And thank you for your service and time on the advisory committee as well, Randy. We appreciate all you've done for our profession and your assistance here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we move on to commissioner comments. I believe I saw Commissioner O'Rourke and Long were present earlier. Any comments from commissioners? No commissioner comments at this time. Under old business, we have no old business for discussion. And under new business, Assistant Executive Director Jim Grotko will announce the nominations for new advisory committee members to be voted on in the commission meeting tomorrow.
Thank you, Chairman. There are two. The first, as Member Waltz mentioned, is Lieutenant Brent Stocker, currently serves as commander with the Fresno County Sheriff's Office Training Unit. Lieutenant Stocker has over 32 years of experience in law enforcement, 20 years teaching in police courses, overseeing modules 3, 2, and 1 academies. And he teaches police at the police academy currently, and has served on post committees and is involved with the QAP program. The second nomination is a self-nomination from Alan McFadden, who is a former member representing dispatch, I think through 2016, and is now seeking a position as a public member. And those two names will be forwarded to the commission tomorrow for a vote. And that's all.
Okay, thank you. Our future meetings, we have an upcoming advisory committee meeting that will be held March 6, 2024 in the greater Los Angeles area, California. And with that, we will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you.